Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we start this new edition right now. Protesters in 16 Brazilian cities have taken to the street to reject a hike in transportation prices. More than 9,000 people are expected to demonstrate. Members of the Free Pass movement organized the process in 15 other cities across 6 states, including Goiás, Pernambuco, and Rio de Janeiro. 5 days ago, the city of Sao Paulo raised prices on public buses, the metro, and trains by 20 cents. Our correspondent Ignacio Limas has more.
Así es, saludos estudios, tal como ocurrió en el 2013 con el
Just happened in 2013. Public transit fares are increasing once again, and people in Sao Paulo are taking to the streets to protest this measure. The demonstrations were organized by students and the Pase Libre movement. The Sin Miedo movement, one of the biggest social and trade union movements in the city, is also joining the protest. They are opposing an increase which means Brazilians will have to pay more than $1 to take the bus in one of the most important cities of the country, an increase that the government is trying to introduce while people are enjoying the summer holiday. The groups are also denouncing a cut in the number of bus lines in Sao Paulo, a decision made by the mayor of the city, and the privatization of a second subway line. That decision was made by the governor of the state, with the support of the federal government of Michel Temer, to reduce the debt the state has with the federal government. Protesters are asking the Sao Paulo government to put a stop to this measure, arguing there are more than 14 million unemployed people in Brazil who have a hard time paying the current transport fares.
The Ecuadorian government has granted citizenship to Julian Assange hours after the British government refused to grant diplomatic status to the WikiLeaks founder. Foreign Minister Maria Fernanda Espinosa confirmed the granting of Ecuadorian citizenship to Assange on December 12th in an attempt to find a dignified solution to his 5.5-year imprisonment at the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Another alternative refers to the naturalization process of Mr. Assange. He made a request to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility for his naturalization on September 16, 2017. Once, of course, he had remained as a person under international protection for around 5.5 years under the jurisdiction of the Ecuadorian state in its embassy in London. This naturalization was granted on December 12, 2017. On December 20th, the Foreign Ministry, through its embassy in London, requested the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs to consider the accreditation of Mr. Assange as a diplomatic agent in the mission of Ecuador in the United Kingdom. That request was denied on December 21st. In view of the good relations we have with the United Kingdom, we declined that option.
The dialogue between Venezuela's government and the opposition is underway in the Dominican Republic. After previous talks in December, both sides say important progress has been made, but that they won't be commenting further until they have a final agreement. Delegates from the government and the opposition are meeting today in bilateral working groups. On Friday, they will meet with international observers. They're discussing 6 main issues to find a solution to the economic and political conflict in Venezuela. And U.S. Senator Marco Rubio has criticized the Venezuelan dialogue process. On Twitter, the Republican senator said Venezuela has a long history of luring the opposition to negotiations, but progress is never made and concessions are usually superficial. He added that concessions made can be easily taken away. Rubio also said U.S. sanctions will not be lifted, even if President Maduro can get the opposition to lobby for it. And Delcy Rodriguez, the president of the Venezuelan National Constituent Assembly, has rejected the comments. She accused Senator Rubio of trying to sabotage the process with vulgar and improper comments. She said the Venezuelan people will display democracy and dignity. The Assembly's president also had words for the Chilean Foreign Minister, Orlando Munoz, who said the dialogue should stop if there aren't immediate results. Rodriguez said Mr. Munoz is opting for the sad back door and is serving low U.S. interests. The opposition had its concerns too and issued a reminder about what is at stake. Juan Andres Mejia, a representative of the opposition party, Voluntad Popular, said that they will take to the streets if this new round of dialogue with the government fails. The government has dismissed his remarks.
Is this how we want to create an atmosphere of dialogue in the Dominican Republic with these tweets of Voluntad Popular? With Mr. Mejia warning us that they will take to the streets if the negotiations fail. We say to Mejia and Voluntad Popular that they don't need to go to the Dominican Republic if they don't want to.
Meantime, Venezuelan and Netherlands authorities will meet on Friday to seek a solution to the problem of smuggling to the islands of Aruba, Curacao and Borneo. Smuggled Venezuelan goods are currently freely available on Aruba's store shelves. Our correspondent Madeline Garcia has the story.
On the shelves of some Aruban supermarkets, you can find smuggled Venezuelan products. This jar of mayo, for example, is dated November 11, 2017, a date when mayo could not be found in Venezuelan stores. You can also find Venezuelan tuna, which over there costs 400,000 bolívares, but here it is sold for $2. Closing the border due to contraband has also affected legal trade, such as fruit and vegetable commerce.
We have to buy American products, which are too expensive in comparison to Venezuelan products, which are also better. The entire island is affected. American products cost 3 times as much. We would pay $25 for a box of Venezuelan lemons. If we buy American, they cost between $65 and $70.
Aruba's government bans sales of uncertified copper originated from Venezuela. But copper is hardly the only issue. Gold being sold in jewelry stores in Aruba and Curacao is also part of the contraband. These topics will be discussed on Friday by the affected governments.
If there is no conversation, nothing can be resolved. It's like a disagreement between a mother and her child. The only way to resolve it is to have a conversation.
Curacao is a main gold exporter, despite the fact it possesses no gold mines. One of the main topics to be discussed on Friday is how to maintain a healthy and mutually beneficial trade relationship between both nations.
And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Several reactions followed the Colombian government's decision to remove its negotiating team from peace talks with the National Liberation Army. The talks were set to resume in Quito, Ecuador, yesterday. Our correspondent, Lorena Hoyos, has more.
In the last hours, several congressmen have spoken about the tension between the ELN and the government. They have asked the Congress Peace Commission to analyze the situation and to find a way to act as a mediator if both sides decide to meet again in Quito, Ecuador. Civilians have insisted that the ELN and the government have to overcome the difficulties that happened in the last days and need to be fixed at the dialogue table. They are asking both sides to resume the negotiation process so they can find a solution to the tensions. The people are also asking the sides to define a new mechanism that can allow another bilateral ceasefire. Colombia is currently immersed in an election process with votes set to take place in summer. Presidential candidates from the right have said that the government should put an end to the negotiations and to intensify the war against the ELN. But the center and the left-wing parties are supporting the peace process and also want both sides to return to Ecuador to advance the dialogues. General Alberto Mejia, commander of the army, said that the government has ordered the military to intensify actions against the ELN. The communities affected by the armed conflict have said the military actions are having deep consequences, especially regarding forced displacement of civilians, and they insist the only way to end this war is with dialogue.
We thank Lorena Hoyos for that report. In Bolivia, the first of the measures called for by the Bolivian Workers' Confederation, the COB, to force the government to revoke the new criminal code has had little impact. Our correspondent, Freddie Morales, has more details.
Economic, labor, productive, and financial activities took place as normal in the city of La Paz on the day of the strike that was called by the Bolivian Workers' Union.
Today is only a strike, without mobilizations. In the morning, we have indicated that it's at a national level, with marches with mobilizations in each department.
The reason for the calls to protest is the new criminal code. Several unions and the opposition have joined to demand their annulment.
These are demonstrations that try to generate destabilization in our democracy. But what I am seeing, for example, the demonstration and the national strike that have been announced by the transport workers has failed.
In the government, it is considered that some leaders of the workers' union, which were their partners until recently, like their senior leader, Guido Mitma, have personal interests.
This minority of leaders of the workers' union are abandoning their mission of being the representatives of the workers and the workers' interests to make conspiracy politics against our government.
The doctors started the demonstration against an article of the new criminal code, a conflict already solved. But the political opposition, along with another 10 unions, have created a Democracy Defense Committee to demand the complete annulment of the regulation.
Authorities in Chile have detected a 40-meter crack in the crater of the Chillán volcano, raising alarm in nearby communities and particularly among scientists who are permanently monitoring its activity. Flyovers and cameras set up at the Chillán volcano have documented incandescent displays of rocks associated with minor explosions. Officials fear this kind of activity could eventually lead to a major eruption. In Paraguay, the Women's Integral Protection Law against violence has come into effect, but the feminist movement recognizes that there's still a lot more to do to address violence against women, although this law does show progress.
Before this new law, Paraguay didn't recognize feminicide in their penal code, and according to feminist lawyer Sonia von Lepel, the country had already received recommendations from the Committee of the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
One of the important removals that the law had was the withdrawal of the theoretical foundation of the word gender, and this prevents a deeper approach to the problems of femicide in the country.
For the feminist movement, the legal tool is a progress, but they criticize that conservative legislators remove the word gender from the final text, because it limits solving the problem.
One of the important removals that the law had was the withdrawal of the theoretical foundation of the word gender. And this prevents a deeper approach to the problems of feminicide in the country.
The law that went into effect applies to women, without any kind of discrimination, to face facts or omissions that involve any type of violence. According to official data, there were 53 feminicides in 2017 and 2 in 2018.
It has made progress. It has its flaws from our point of view. For instance, for us, it's very important that it focuses on human rights and gender.
The feminist movement announced that they will join the International Women's March on March 8th, Working Women's Day, with demonstrations and debates. They will continue demanding the end of discrimination and violence.
A recent decision by Mexican officials to train students to deal with shootings inside schools has become controversial. Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has the story.
25 million students have returned to classes in Mexico after the end of the year holidays. And many will face shooting drills like this. criticism is rising due to these exercises in high schools in South Baja California.
I think it's wrong, that it's not relevant at this moment. Even the teachers disagree with all of it.
Citizens criticize the proposal by the Education Secretariat of the Safe Education Program for Mexico City, when the main demands from schools are rebuilding efforts after the earthquake in September destroyed several schools and paralyzed classes. But what they do agree on is that the violence in the streets of Mexico has reached the schools. Analysts, however, are worried about a federal protocol to take place in cases of violence.
These are overwhelming levels of stress and anxiety for children. If we are dealing with situations that could be potentially damaging for their mental health, in this sense, the proposed solution could be worse than the social problem we have.
The problem, he says, is real and therefore should be presented in a thoughtful way to the students.
This has to do with the way in which we provide information, the way in which we educate them, in making it clear why we need to implement a protocol so rough as preparing for a shooting.
2017 was the most violent year in Mexico, with almost 28,000 homicide victims, from which 1 out of 10 was a minor.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Three more Catalan leaders are waiting for the Spanish Supreme Court to decide on their imprisonment. Our correspondent Joan Ortiz has the details from Barcelona.
¿Qué tal, compañeros? Saludos.
The Catalan territory is paying attention to what is happening at the Spanish Supreme Tribunal, although there is a possibility that they will not decide today on the preventive measures against Jordi Sanchez, Jordi Cuixart, and Joaquín Forn. The separatist parties that they belong to are not very hopeful about their release. This afternoon, the defense of the three in jail will formally present a petition to have them freed, but the decision is in the prosecution's hands. We know that the prosecution has demanded that the three who are accused of sedition respect the Constitution. Oriol Junqueras, leader of Esquerra Republicana, who is also in jail, testified at the Supreme Tribunal last week, but his arguments were rejected by the court since the prosecution considered the Catalan leader will again commit the same offenses he is being accused of. We will have to wait for the court's decision.
We thank Joan Ortiz for that report. The Israeli government has given the final approval to build 352 new homes in the West Bank, which Palestinians see as part of their future state. The buildings, illegal under international law, will be Jewish homes constructed in at least 20 settlements. It is the highest number of approved construction units since 2013 and marks the latest in a series of offensive moves by Israel in the region.
This announcement yesterday by the Higher Planning Committee to approve 1,122 new settlement housing units in the West Bank and 651 tenders represents either the government's clear disregard for a two-state solution or an attempt to explicitly undermine it. By building in the settlements, this further erodes the possibility of a Palestinian state that has a certain degree of territorial integrity, and at the same time, it makes it more difficult for Israel to finally disentangle from the Palestinians in a two-state solution.
Israeli troops shot dead 2 Palestinian youths in clashes in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli-occupied West Bank amid rising tensions. A 16-year-old youth was killed and 2 others wounded in a clash near the Gaza-Israel border fence in which Palestinians threw stones at Israeli troops. Another was killed in a nearby village during protests. Today marks the 16th anniversary of the opening of United States Guantanamo Prison, a facility established to hold detainees swept up during former President George W. Bush's so-called war on terror.
In response to the 9/11 attacks in 2001 and subsequent military operations by the United States in Afghanistan, existing migrant detention facilities at Guantanamo were repurposed as an offshore prison for captives in the war on terror. It was intentionally established on a U.S. naval base on the tip of Cuba that George W. Bush's lawyers argued was beyond the reach of U.S. law, which means detainees could be denied legal protection.
They are inherently unfair. They are set up to be a second-class system of justice. So I think that they are inherently flawed and will not deliver fairness for either side.
Shortly after his inauguration in 2009, President Barack Obama signed an executive order to close the facility. But even at the end of his term in 2017, Guantanamo remained in operation.
I continue to believe that Guantanamo is a recruitment tool for terrorist organizations, that it clouds and sours some of the counterterrorism cooperation that we need to engage in. And it's not necessary, and it's hugely expensive for U.S. taxpayers.
Although authorities claim prisoners were held in humane conditions, reports surfaced showing quite the opposite. There were accounts of intense torture and sexual humiliation, pushing dozens of prisoners to suicide. Kako, an Afghan prisoner who was recently released from Guantanamo, recounts the horrors he faced.
This prison is changing the minds of people like my friend from the prison and many more. This prison is the worst place, and I think it is better to shut it down. To stabilize those who were released from Guantanamo, there should be a compensation for them.
Despite a loud campaign by legal activists and scholars, the Bush administration insisted that prisoners were not eligible to be tried by the normal channels used by civilian and military courts. However, after much outcry, in 2008, the United States Supreme Court ruled that detainees had the right of access to federal courts. Still, lawyers for Guantanamo inmates say the ruling came a little too late.
Issues like kind of physical inhumanity and abuse that existed in the earlier years, I think for the majority of the men now, is not really the main problem. It is the condition of, after over 12 years of detention without charge, still not knowing whether or if you are going home.
At the height of the so-called war on terror, Guantanamo held as many as 780 prisoners. The Bush administration transferred over 500 detainees out of the prison, while the Obama administration moved almost 200 inmates. Today, 41 prisoners still remain, not knowing if they will ever see freedom or their families.
The largest raid operation by U.S. immigration agents targeting a single employer since President Donald Trump took office happened on Wednesday night. ICE raided 98 7-Eleven stores across 70 states, arresting 21 people. The agency said the raids would send a message to other companies that may be employing unauthorized workers. These expansions of immigration enforcement have left some citizens in disarray and dismay.
I'm at my local 7-Eleven on Beverly and Koreatown, and I just found out about the immigration raids Trump enforced specifically for 7-Elevens. It's disgusting, and I'm disappointed in our president's immigration policy. My family is personally being affected, as them being DACA recipients are now being forced to go back to Mexico and live in disgusting, unhumane conditions. I feel like he needs to stay off of Twitter and make America great again, like he said.
I'm green card holder. I've worked in the 7-Eleven 2 years. My boss, he doesn't hire the illegal workers for the 7-Eleven, but new immigration policy is very terrible and like crazy. It's wrong.
The Canadian government is trying to dissuade Salvadorian refugees in the United States from entering its borders. About 200,000 Salvadorians were given protected status in the U.S. after a major earthquake in 2001. However, that status runs out in September next year. Canada has sent a Spanish-speaking member of parliament to the U.S. to talk to community groups and dissuade immigrants from trying to cross the northern border. Canada is trying to prevent an influx like the one that happened last year after 50,000 Haitians lost their protected status. The NSA warrantless surveillance program has been extended for another 6 years, rejecting lawmakers' efforts to adjust the bill to protect the privacy of U.S. citizens. The program allows United States spy agencies to collect information on foreign targets outside the United States, but citizens' communications are often inadvertently swept up in the process. Privacy advocates and some lawmakers want to require the FBI to get a warrant to collect the content of citizens' email, text messages, photos, and other electronic communication, but the House has rejected the measure.
Spying on foreigners without following the Constitution, that is okay. Spying on Americans without following the Constitution, that is not okay. The Fourth Amendment does not have an asterisk that says our intelligence agencies don't have to follow it.
Britain, France, and Germany have urged U.S. President Donald Trump not to tear up the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that was brokered by the Obama administration. The call comes as the deadline approaches for the reissue of a waiver suspending U.S. sanctions that requires Trump to periodically certify Iran's compliance. The diplomat said the deal is essential for international security, and the European Union's diplomatic chief, Federica Mogherini, says the Iran nuclear deal is working.
The unity of the international community is essential to preserve a deal that is working, that is making the world safer, and that is preventing potential nuclear arms race in the region. And we expect all parties to continue to fully implement this agreement.
Possibly filled with the Olympic spirit, North and South Korea are set to discuss their participation in the upcoming Winter Olympics in South Korea, something that could prove to be a historic step towards peace. We go to our correspondent, Isiara Diaz from Beijing, for the latest of this unique meeting.
The International Olympic Committee is calling for a meeting with officials from both Koreas to discuss the details of the participation of the North Korean delegation in the upcoming Winter Olympic Games to be held in February in South Korea. The meeting is scheduled for January 20th in Lausanne, Switzerland, where they will meet with Thomas Bach, the president of the International Olympic Committee, as a result of the official talks between both Koreas, the first of this type in 2 years. North Korea will send a delegation of artists, athletes, observers, journalists, a team of taekwondo performers and members of the International Olympic Committee to these Winter Olympic Games in South Korea, which have already been called the Peace Olympics. This inter-Korean approach also triggered talks to reopen a military dialogue between both Koreas to ease tensions in the region. Another topic that could be discussed will be the possibility of family reunions in the near future. All of this takes place quite separately from the position of the United States, where President Donald Trump recently said that a dialogue with North Korea could be possible if the conditions are right. Nevertheless, on this side of the world, North and South Korea have already taken the first steps to grow closer, aiming at the holding of successful and peaceful Olympic Games. We'll keep you updated.
We thank Isiara Diaz for that report, and we've come to the end of this news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can find them on our telesyourtv.net/English website. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.